welcome Scott Plum to the podium to share a little bit about
Sure, very much. Okay. First, I'd like to clarify any confusion. A lot of people get me confused with Scott Welle. We're both authors, and because of our physique and commitment to running marathons. Because the truth is what you believe. Right? I'd like to share that in the speaker circle, Mr. Welle is very highly regarded as a real authority when it comes to sales, when it comes to personal performance, and really when it comes to inspiring others to achieve greatness. He is a very highly regarded authority in that area within the speaker circles. And I really want you to, I encourage you to open up your hearts and your head to really think about the message that Scott has for us today, because it's the same thing that I would say, and that's why there's so much confusion. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome Scott, or Mike. I'm Scott. So, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Here you go, Mike.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I know, a lot of confusion.
So like a number of you in the room, I had the good pleasure of meeting Scott, was so impressed by him 6 years
Scott
ago.
Welle, right?
I'm sorry.
Scott Welle.
Yeah, Scott Welle.
The confusion, I just want to clarify.
As a former Toastmaster, he absolutely hit it out of the park. And I was so impressed by him, I bought his book. I'm going to buy his new book today. But we connected on so many different levels. Being a former marathoner and triathlete myself, not as good as him. I even dug up my 1991 first triathlon shirt 32 years ago when I got into it. Not at his level, but if you make that whole thing part of your life, it's a life changer. And so I was so impressed by Scott as a former city administrator. At the time I was at Brooklyn Center, brought him in. We never really could get him in there, but I brought him into the League of Minnesota Cities executive director and said, you got to get this guy in. It took that many years later, but the keynote speaker in the 2022 League of Minnesota Cities annual conference was that guy right there. Give him a round of applause. Outstanding. He absolutely hit it out of the park. Yeah, did an outstanding job. And he's someone that when you walk out of here today, make sure, and he's got it on the table, make sure you get his weekly email blast. He sends it out on Friday afternoons, and it's so much good stuff. Positivity, and his videos are just absolutely outstanding. We are so fortunate to have him. And then on a very, very, very personal note, that long ago I lost my parents, both of my parents, and someone turned me on to a very important book, and I'm going to present this book to Scott. He lost both of his parents within the last couple of years. It's called The Orphaned Adult. Some of you know this book, but it brought me out of so much grief after losing my parents 6 years ago. So I want you to please all stand up, join me in a round of applause, and welcoming our speaker this afternoon, Scott Welle.
Thank you. Thanks, appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. We still on there?
No, it's coming now, I think.
We'll get it back. Oh. We'll get this back, I'm sure. All right, I don't even know where to begin with all this, other than to say I'm fortunate to speak roughly 65 to 75 times each year, either live or virtually. And I don't think I've ever had two people intro me before a speech. I am just flattered. I certainly don't deserve two introductions, but thank you, Mike. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. And let's see if we can make this look just a little bit better up here. There we go. Because what we are going to talk about today is straight out of my latest book, Outperform the Norm, Daily Execution, Extraordinary Results. And before we even get into kind of some of what that content actually looks like, just a little background on me, for those of you that don't know, I was born and raised in Albany, Minnesota. Anybody know where Albany is? Yeah, okay. Just west on I-94, just past St. Cloud. When I grew up there, it was a town of 1,500 people. Business is booming there. I think we're up over 2,000 now. But I split time currently between Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Denver, Colorado. And Minneapolis and Minnesota is somewhere that I will always call home. Hence why I'm wearing the Vikings purple. Big game coming up this Sunday, right? But I'm really fortunate to be able to travel all around the country speaking to different groups about leadership, about sales, about goal achievement, about peak performance. And really what we're going to get into today is we're going to talk about some of the distinguishing characteristics between what the norm does and what outperformers do. And really what we're going to talk about is 3 different sections throughout the course of today, which is exactly how my book happens to be segmented as well. We're going to talk about the psychology underneath our goals and kind of how we can actually aspire to big things personally, professionally, athletically. We're going to talk about the strategy of goal setting, how we can construct a plan to be able to set, to be able to achieve our goals. And then we're also going to talk about the execution of goal achievement, which I sometimes think is probably the hardest part, right? Like, how do we actually build habits and patterns and routines that serve us each and every day? But before we even get into those 3 things, what I actually want to do is I actually want to look backwards just a little bit. Now, I don't know if any of you recognize this picture, but you want to take a guess on where this was? This was 6 years ago. Friday the 13th. 6 years ago, 2017. And if there's one thing that I've learned about outperformers and about high achievers, they're very good at looking forward, right? Like you sometimes see it on like social media, like you always got to be looking through the windshield, don't look in the rear view. And to a degree, I can kind of agree with that. Like you want to avoid complacency, you want to kind of continue to work hard. But I do think sometimes we can all benefit from looking at how far we've come and not just how much farther we have yet to go. And it was really interesting going back and reflecting back to Friday the January 2017, because this picture, going back and kind of looking at it, you know, transporting myself back to that time was very interesting on a couple of levels. One, when I looked back at it and I looked back through my speaking schedule, my first 12 speaking engagements that year in 2017, you want to take a guess on how much revenue I generated from those 12 speaking engagements? Maybe $50, because maybe I sold a couple of books. And keep in mind, I do actually run a for-profit business. So when you're speaking 12 times in January and February and early March, and you're doing it all for free, just simply because I'm trying to get a message out there, I'm trying to figure this thing out, I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to get better, it was really interesting looking at it through that lens. And that's where I can come in and I can look at it through some degree of just tremendous humility and gratitude and appreciation when I've got 2 people introducing me up here, and there are some speaking engagements that I get to do where I'm fortunate to earn more for one speaking engagement than I made my whole entire first year of speaking. Because I know what ramen noodles taste like. I know what peanut butter sandwiches for every meal taste like. I know what credit card debt feels like. I remember going back to that time in 2017, and Mike actually touched on this a little bit too. You know, going back to the Friday the 13th, 2017, my mother was diagnosed with throat cancer on that New Year's Eve, right before 2016 coming into 2017. And you know, she was not in very good health, and she was very frail. So unfortunately, there were no curative options. She passed away the first week of March that year. And for those of you that I'm connected to that know a little bit of my story, unfortunately, my father passed away 13 months after that. I lost both of my parents before the age of 37. My dad passed away the day before my 37th birthday. And it was freaking hard. Like, just to be honest with you, like, it was really, really hard. And when I talk about this, one of the things we're actually going to start out with here is talking about how much you've grown in the last few years. And to look at kind of not just the professional part of growth, but the personal part of growth and what losing both my parents taught me. I think to some degree I can still kind of be a little bit of a hard ass from time to time, but I think I'm a little bit more of a hard ass, maybe with some compassion. It taught me empathy, it taught me understanding, it taught me that, hey, a lot of people are just doing the best they can. And there are sometimes people that are out there that are fighting battles that you know nothing about. And I just remember going through some of those tough times and some of those struggling times where I was supposed to be the guy that, you're the motivational speaker, Scott, like get up here and just motivate people. And I could barely get out of bed in the morning. I wasn't feeling very motivated myself. So what I actually want to do to start this off, and this is going to make some of you probably feel very uncomfortable, because I want you to not be Minnesota nice. I actually want you to give yourself the pat on the back that you deserve. And what I'd actually like you to do is, whether you were in this room 6 years ago or not, I want you to go back and I want you to think about, where were you in 2017? And I'm going to just ask the open-ended question, how have you grown since then? And you can look at growth, you can look at it personally, you can look at it professionally, you can look at it spiritually, you can look at it athletically. I'm asking it open-ended, just like that. But I want you to reflect on not just how much farther you have to go, but also how far you've come to this point. So let's actually, I'm going to have you just partner up, if you don't mind, with the person to your left or right, and let's just take a couple of minutes. I just want you to talk about those two very basic questions. Go ahead. Okay, everybody, let's bring it back in. Yeah. Wow, jeez, wow. Yeah.
A bell will ring if you need them.
I'm doing that next time. All right. I'm going to keep you all here all afternoon. Seriously. Extroverted optimist. I'm not going to have any of you volunteer some of what you discuss, but I'll just say briefly on this. The reason that we did this exercise is, in the psychology of peak performance and how we should look at it, when we reflect back on some of our past wins, our past growth, our past successes, that should give us tremendous confidence that wherever you're at right now as you sit here and whatever you're aspiring to in 2023, if there's any part of you that's doubting your ability to get that done, which, by the way, is a normal human emotional mental response, doesn't make you weak or broken or frail or anything like that, this should give you confidence that, you know what, I've figured some stuff out. Like, I've gotten through some tough times, and if you really want to know the internal dialogue of the outperformer, what they say to themselves is, you know what, if I've done it before, I can do it again. And if I got through that, I can get through this. So again, I'm not telling you to spend all of your time looking in the rear view. I'm really bad at this. But every now and then looking back and saying, wow, I've really come a long ways. Like, I've really grown as a person or as a professional or anything else, I think can be really advantageous for all of us in bolstering our confidence to be able to move forward. Yes? Yeah. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the psychology underneath goals. And I want you to remember this kind of subpoint. Any goal is realistic with an intelligent plan to accomplish it. Now let's actually talk just a little bit about kind of the landscape of goal setting, because we're at the perfect time of the year right now, right? You can probably guess that organizationally it's a little difficult to kind of do goal setting and kind of goal achievement research, because you never know, Are the numbers actually the accurate numbers? So a lot of what we know about our ability to set and achieve goals comes from things like New Year's resolutions. And you can probably guess that the amount of people, I'm sure not you because you're all outperforming optimists, but the number of people that actually set and achieve their goals is staggeringly small. To the point of less than 3% of people on planet Earth will actually set goals. Set goals. And by setting goals, and I was guilty of this probably for my first 25 plus years on the planet, by setting goals, I mean you're actually taking what's in your head, you're putting it down on paper or putting it into the computer, and you're creating a plan of action for it. So to speak, you're thinking it and inking it. Less than 3% of people on planet Earth will actually do that. Of those less than 3% of people that will actually set goals, somewhere between 84 to maybe 92% of those will fail to achieve them. So I'm actually going to open it up to the group, and I would love to just hear from a couple of people. There's not a right and a wrong answer, but why do you think this is? Why is it so hard for us to be able to set and or achieve our goals? And we'll get one more from just over here. Go ahead.
Confusion due to lack of focus.
Confusion due to lack of focus. Yes, especially when we get to talking about the goal setting strategy part, we're going to talk about the difference between kind of to-dos and being unfocused versus actually having focused priorities. So all of you are 100% right on this, and I'll just chime in with a couple of my thoughts. One, I think what makes goal setting and goal achievement very difficult is a lot of us don't have any background in it necessarily. Like, it's not what we were taught in school, right? I don't know what school you went to, but it's not like in Albany, you know, your 4 classes this semester, you have math and science and English and goals, you know, like it's just, it's not something that we were taught when we were young. So now all of a sudden, personally, professionally, athletically, we get into adulthood and we're thinking about these things that we want to do and we want to achieve. And it's like, whoa, I don't have a reference point for that, or I don't have necessarily some training that I can go back to. And I think the other part of it that I would chime in with is I really don't think our goals at the end of the day are that motivating and are that inspiring necessarily. And this is where we get into something like, how many of you have ever heard of SMART goals? Okay? Sort of like we can say, hey Siri or Alexa, and it's like if you just set goals that are specific and measurable and action-oriented and realistic and timed, then you're going to be able to go ahead and you're going to be able to set and achieve what it is that you want to do. And please understand, as I mentioned SMART goals, and it's a lot of kind of, I mean, everybody's heard about it regardless of what group I speak to. And quite honestly, a lot of the SMART goal setting principles I touch on in my book. So I don't think SMART goals are wrong. I just think they're incomplete. Incomplete as far as what really motivates and inspires human behavior at the highest level. And that's where I'd encourage you, as you go forth and as you outperform, to not just have SMART goals, but to actually use a Scott Welle original acronym of I want you to have dumb goals as well. Dumb goals in this case is I want you to have goals that are dream-driven, unrealistic, meaningful, and that benefit others. Pretty good, right? I thought it was pretty good. If you want to know what truly does inspire and motivate human behavior, it's not the logical left brain part of SMART goals. It's really not. That might be great for kind of the tactical component of it, but what actually gets us a burning fire in our belly and what really inspires us to move towards something is having things that are dream-driven, unrealistic, meaningful, and that benefit others. So let's just quickly touch on this. Dream-driven. Dream-driven is just another way of saying vision. If I'm speaking to a company, if I'm speaking to an organizational team, what's the vision for the company? You can have your own personal vision for where you want to go. And sometimes I will hear this from people. They're like, MLK Day is coming up on Monday, right? They'll say, well, I'm not a visionary leader because I'm not battling for civil rights. Please don't do that. You are a visionary leader because all you're doing when you're talking about something like vision or talking about having goals that align with something that's dream-driven is you're just thinking about how is tomorrow going to be better than today? And how is the future going to look better than the present? And if you don't believe that that's going to be the case, do you really think that you're going to be motivated and going to be inspired to do it? Because you're not. The U, unrealistic. This is probably my biggest contention with SMART goals, because SMART goals, the R is realistic. Let me ask you this very basic, simple question. Who determines whether a goal is realistic or unrealistic? You. You do. We all do. When we look at what is realistic versus unrealistic, and this is where at the beginning I said, remember, any goal is realistic with an intelligent plan to accomplish it. Now, I'm not saying you have to be the one that goes out there and you have to cure cancer, you have to send someone to Mars, if that's not what's in your heart, and if that's not what you want to do. But I want you to open up your heart and your brain to the possibility that you've accomplished and achieved many things in your life since 2017 and otherwise that probably at the time seemed unrealistic. And for most people, whether it's you talking to yourself or you're talking to a direct report or talking to a son or daughter or anyone else, for most people, telling them to be realistic is telling them to be self-limiting. And we should not be doing that. Let's open ourselves up to the fact that we can achieve and accomplish great things. Then we create the intelligent plan. And if at the end of the day, that plan is like, whoa, Scott, you're saying you're going to play for the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday? Like, it kind of seems a little bit unrealistic. Like, you might want to go back to the drawing board. But at this part, when we're just talking about the psychology of goals, we shouldn't limit ourselves with what we deem to be realistic or unrealistic. M, meaningful. Why does it matter? Deep down in the places that we seldom talk about, like, why does it really matter? Why is it meaningful to you? Why would it be impactful for you to achieve or for you to accomplish this goal? And then the B, the benefits others. Everything we know about social psychology will say that we will always play harder for others than we will play just for ourselves. And like Mike, you got up here before and you were talking about triathlons and things like that. I ran my 31st marathon, the Twin Cities Marathon, back this last October. I will usually have some kind of athletic goal every year for me. And you might look at that and you might think, well, that's kind of a selfish goal, like that's just for you. It's not. The way that I look at it is when I'm pursuing that goal, I know without a shadow of a doubt that it makes me a better speaker, it makes me a better fiance, it makes me a better dad, it makes me a better friend. And when I'm unmotivated and when I don't feel like going out there and training and doing something, I think about I need to do this because I need to show up better for others. Yes? That's what motivates and inspires human behavior. It really is. And all I'm asking is that as you go forth and as you think about the goals that you want to have, let's just make sure that we tap into a little bit of that emotional component of having things that are dream-driven, unrealistic, meaningful, and benefits others. So that's psychology. Now, let's actually talk about creating the plan, right? The failing to plan is planning to fail. Goal setting strategy, and this is what I call the OPP. And if you want to say, yeah, you know me, anybody know what I'm talking about? All right, I always have a couple, okay. Old school hip hop group, Naughty by Nature from the 90s that had a song called OPP. All around the country, there's always someone that's like, yeah, you know me. But in this case, the goal setting framework that I think can be universally applied to almost anything that you would like to do is the outcome, the performance, and the process. Now to start out, outcomes, all of you are familiar with. because for better or for worse, it's how we're typically graded and evaluated and judged at the end of the season, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year. All an outcome goal is, when we look at what we want to achieve or accomplish, it's the finish line at the end of the race, it's the end destination at the end of the GPS. Outcome goals are fantastic because they provide motivation and direction for what we do, but what can sometimes make them problematic is that we only ever have indirect control over whether we achieve or whether we accomplish them. So that's where we're going to break down the performance and the process after this, but what I would like you to do is to get back with that person to your left or right, and I would like you to share one outcome that you're working towards right now. Now, this can be something that's, hey, this is what I would like to do by the end of Q1 this year. This could be something by the end of 2023. This could be something that's even more off in the distance. But as you sit here right now, personally, professionally, athletically, or otherwise, what is one outcome that you're working towards? And then we'll start to break that down a little bit from here. So go ahead, let's just take about 1 or 2 minutes. All right, that works so much better than me just screaming at people. It really does. All right, last one. Come on. All right. I'm sorry. I want to be respectful of your time. I don't want to go over, so I'm sorry. Everybody, let's bring it back, please. Please. Thank you. Okay. The one thing that I should have said as you're thinking about your outcome goals is relative to like a GPS, even if you don't know exactly where you want to end up, I would encourage you as much as possible to try to have a precise and to try to have a specific destination. Knowing that it might change a little bit with time, but sort of like when I drove here today from uptown Minneapolis and I put I don't even know what the exact address is here right now, but if I put in just Roseville, I can end up at a lot of different spots, and it's harder for me to create the strategic plan if I don't know exactly where that end destination is, versus I put the exact destination of where at this time I think I want to end up, and now I can create the turn-by-turn directions to allow me to be able to get there. Hopefully that makes sense. So outcomes you're all familiar with because, again, it's what a lot of our society is based upon, but it is incomplete, and we do have to strip it down into the performance as well as the process. And performance goals, very simply what you're seeing on screen, is actually a picture from the Twin Cities Marathon this last year. Used to run one marathon together with my brother every single year. Fortunately, we had to take a couple years off during COVID time, but we got back after it in the Twin Cities Marathon this last October. Happy to say that we set a Welle brothers personal best, so that was awesome. But just out of curiosity, because this actually doesn't just have to be marathoning, how many of you have ever participated in any kind of organized race? Whether it's a 1 mile run, walk, or a marathon, or a 100 mile, or anything else. Okay. Performance goals are simply this. What do you do when the finish line feels like it's impossibly far away? And you feel like, man, no matter what I'm doing right now, it's not getting me any closer to that finish line or that end destination. What do? You might pray, maybe you think about the beer or the pancakes at the finish line or something, but what you probably do is you create benchmarks and checkpoints and milestones. That's the psychology, and that's what we need to do with performance goals. So I always tell people, I've run 31 marathons, and trust me, every single time I'm at the start line, and in this case I'm standing outside of US Bank Stadium, and I'm thinking, man, I got to run all the way to the Capitol in St. Paul. Like, that seems really freaking far away. How am I ever going to make that happen? But it's not actually 26.2 miles. It's 26 1-mile intervals or 1-mile checkpoints, God willing, followed by a sprint down Summit Avenue to the Capitol. And that's how we have to think about our performance goals. This visual is straight out of the book. It's the psychology of thinking about what is the next rung on the ladder that I need to get to. And it can be human nature for all of us, especially if we're thinking about big, hairy, audacious, kind of dumb goals. It can be human nature for us to look up and to say, man, that's a really, really tall freaking ladder. Like, how am I ever going to get to the top of that ladder? You don't need to get to the top of the ladder. You just need to get to the next rung, right? And I know all of you know this, but yet we don't always reinforce it into our psychology as far as how we approach our goals. If you have a health goal, let's just say you want to lose 10 pounds, okay? Well, you can't lose 10 pounds without losing the first 2. So the first 2 might be that first rung on the ladder. If you would like to author, if you would like to write a book, well, you can't write that book without writing the first chapter. That first chapter might be the first rung on the ladder. Asking yourself this question and breaking down these bigger goals into manageable chunks and rungs on the ladder is really, really critically important as far as how you go forward, as far as motivation and inspiration. So that's the first P, or performance goals. And then the second one is simply process goals. This is actually the doing part of goals. It is how you allocate your time, how you allocate your energy. And relative to what you said before as far as focus time, what I recommend outperformers focus on is the intersection of the things that matter and the things that they can control. And where those two things intersect is where you spend the majority of your time. So if outcome is the finish line or the end destination, performance are the checkpoints, then the process is the actual doing part of it. Like the actual, what your actions and activities are every single day. And I flew back from Denver to Minneapolis yesterday. I was listening to a podcast where Tim Ferriss was interviewing James Clear. I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books. I think I'm going to butcher this quote, but he said something like, if someone could only see what you do and not hear your words, what would they say your priorities are? It's an interesting thing to think about, right? It's actually the allocation of our time and energy, not to a lengthy to-do list, but to a limited strategic priorities list, and thinking about what are the couple of things that I can do each day that are going to move the needle, that are going to move me closer to this goal that I want. Critically important. Now, we can talk about just doing this, but the actual part of execution and the actual part of making it happen is probably the hardest thing. And that's really where we'll end on this part of it. And if I can share, in the book I actually have 10 different principles of excellence in execution. But if I can just share a couple of quick ones with you as far as how I look at it and how I'd encourage you to look at your execution, is 1, savor the small wins. Savor these small wins that we get every single day. Very quick story. Last February, I was speaking to a group of financial advisors outside of Chicago. We were talking about goals, and I asked them, what is it you would like to achieve, you would like to accomplish, and what are you going to do? Somebody raised their hand, and they said, I'm going to get up an hour earlier every day. Maybe you're more motivated than me, but an hour earlier kind of seems like a lot, right? So I actually asked him, I said, okay, God bless you. Good luck with that hour. I hope you're able to do that, because I don't think I'd be able to make it more than a week. But I said, why don't you just start with 10 minutes? And of course he looks at me like I have 3 heads. Like, well, 10 minutes, what's 10 minutes going to do? Like, that's nothing. Well, if you get up 10 minutes earlier every day, 70 minutes, more than an hour a week, 60 hours a year, you know, I mean, it's like, it's that little itty bitty bit of stacking up 10 minutes every single day that ends up having a massive impact in the long term. And this is typically what we don't appreciate about our execution, is what holds us back is we're thinking about how every day has to be a perfectionistic ideal of what we deem our disciplined selves to be. and the part of, no, I got a 10-minute workout in today, or no, I got up and I did gratitude for 10 minutes, or I made 2 sales calls even though I really wanted to make 10. Savoring those small wins ends up having a massive impact over the long run, more so than even your best days. And the second and the last one that I'll just share with you is what I simply call clearing the path. Now, this part of it, maybe you've heard the joke that everybody thinks in Minnesota we have 4 different seasons, right? Like we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. We actually don't. We only have 2. We have winter, what we're in right now, and we have road construction, right? Like those are the 2 seasons that we have in Minnesota. And if you think about it through the lens of anytime you're going into something, how can I make it a little bit simpler or easier for me to be able to have success? That is a fantastic question to ask. Because what you're basically doing, we've all been stuck in road construction before, right? You can still arrive at your end destination, but usually it requires more time, more effort, more energy for you to be able to get there. So what I'm encouraging you to do is I'm encouraging you to ask the question, okay, this is what I want at the end of the quarter, the month, the season, the year, etc., however you're thinking about it. How can I potentially clear the path? So it's a little bit more of a straight line between me and where I ultimately want to end up. Now I share this because it can be human nature. I'm sure you've done it because I've done it as well. If you've set out to do something and it hasn't come to fruition, usually the narrative that we run in our head is, well, if I was just a little bit more motivated, like if I was a little bit more disciplined and had a little bit more willpower, I would have been able to do this thing. All you're really saying is, I just need to summon this monumental amount of energy and plow through this road construction, when I think a better way is be in control a little bit more of the construction company that you are and rid maybe some of these distractions that you have. And now it'll be a little bit easier, a little bit simpler for you to be able to have success in whatever it is that you're doing. Can you give me 2 more minutes? You only gonna give me 1? Really? I wasn't told that you were kicking me out quite that. Okay, all right. Anyway, I do have copies of my new book up here. I promise you it's a really, really good book, but I'm the one that wrote it, so what the heck do you expect me to say? But you can come find me afterwards. It obviously goes into a ton more detail as far as all the things that we talked about with goal psychology, goal strategy, goal execution, etc. And I think I'll just end with this really quick story, and I promised I was going to tell it a little bit better if I had more time, but I did get to do the closing keynote for League of Minnesota Cities last June. It was one of the most impactful speaking engagements I've ever gotten to do. And I think one of the things that we do as optimists and as leaders is we believe in others when they do not believe in themselves. And I don't even know if Don Salverdo over here remembers this, but we first met each other in 2015 at PSA, Professional Sales Association. And it was at a time where I was just getting started, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And I remember Don was kind of sitting in the back, and you know, there's always a couple of people in the audience, you can't tell if they love you or if they hate you. And I remember looking at Don, and I was like, I think this guy hates me, like, I don't know. But I got to talk to him afterwards, and it was at a time where I was so new, I was so green, I was trying to figure it out, and quite honestly, I didn't have a lot of belief in myself. And I got to talk to you afterwards, and you said, you can make a career out of this. You were great. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He passed along my name to some other people, and I'm convinced that I probably wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for some of your help and what you've done. So thank you for that. I know I'm over time. I want to encourage you to go and believe in somebody as well, okay? Thank you. God bless. Happy Friday the 13th.